Hello and welcome to Jessica Cherry's ReImagination Café, formerly Reimagining the Workplace. I'm Jessica Cherry. Before we dive in, I want to share why we changed our name. It reflects a decision to broaden our scope to focus not only on the workplace, but also on work itself and how it can be reimagined to serve the greater good. We will absolutely continue to feature stories about creating more human, nurturing workplaces. But at a time when so much going on in the world runs counter to our values, and inspired by the work being done by organizations such as Battery Dance Company, which we're highlighting today, and others, I felt a deep and urgent need to spotlight people and organizations that are both creating better workplaces and addressing some of society's most pressing challenges, those that are truly reimagining work. And I can't think of a better way to begin this new chapter than by introducing you to my guest today, world-renowned choreographer and the founder and artistic director of Battery Dance Company, Jonathan Hollander. Jonathan will share the elements of his background that influence his vision for Battery Dance, and then he'll walk us through the company's remarkable history. We'll hear from Jonathan, of course, and also several of his distinguished colleagues, each of whom will speak from personal experience about how they use dance to cultivate the kinds of human connection that we so urgently need today. But I want to start with a question that underpins everything we'll discuss today, which is, what is it about dance, especially the act of creating dance pieces with others, that makes it such a uniquely powerful force for connection? And why can it break down barriers and build trust in a way that few other art forms can? Let's start with a few short clips from the individuals you'll meet today as they reflect on the transformative power of dance.
I think dance is uniquely strong in being able to break down barriers of distrust and build bridges because it's an art form that is not based on language. Dance is nonverbal. The language is movement. The physical movement, moving with someone, sharing your weight with someone, it creates a different mode of building trust where you're literally relying on your partner to carry your weight in some of the movements. And then also having that physical proximity where you're sharing space. It's a different level of trust building.
Dance speaks a language that we cannot translate into words. And dance comes from a creative point of view from within us. It does not make us think, it just makes us feel. The cadence, our natural rhythm that's being brought alive, let it be through music or a rhythmical sound, it makes us feel an emotion that we cannot even describe. And we all can feel that, whether you are Black, white, Asian, Middle Eastern, or gay, straight, I don't know who you are, we all feel the same. And that's something very beautiful.
I think it's impossible to hate someone that you're rolling around on the floor with, making shapes with, holding hands, using each other for balance. It's just, it brings you closer to everybody.
Dance is the most primal expression of humanity. You don't need a prop, you don't need chalk, you don't need an instrument. It's all your body, and it's what the body can express. And dance is not frivolous. Dance is not something that's kind of, it would be nice if we had it, but let's get down to the business of life. No, dance is inextricable from the business of life.
As you can hear, today's episode brings together passionate voices, each with their own lens on the power and purpose of dance. We have lots to cover, so let's get to it. And Jonathan, you're the anchor today, and then we'll weave in clips of the conversations I've had with some of your colleagues and make those introductions as we go. So first of all, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today, and welcome to the ReImagination Café.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So to start us off, can you share a little bit about your background, including the role the arts played in your life growing up, and also who were your greatest influences?
I grew up in a family that was very much involved in the arts. My mother was a concert-level pianist, meaning she performed with Arthur Fiedler at Symphony Hall in Boston, having won a concerto competition at Vassar. But she decided to become an amateur and to have 4 children instead of touring around the world. There were two Steinway grand pianos in the living room, and each one of my siblings took up an instrument and I played the piano. And I started piano lessons at age 5. At the same time, my mother was involved with Adventure Theater, a really, really fine group of adults performing for children. And so I was a rat in the Pied Piper. I performed at the Library of Congress. I must have been about 6 or 7 years old.
And you grew up outside of DC, correct?
That's right. So Washington, D.C. wasn't what it is now with the Kennedy Center, setting aside what's going on there today. But there was Arena Stage, the National Symphony Orchestra, Washington Performing Arts Society that brought in Vladimir Horowitz and Arthur Rubinstein. And there was just so much going on. And my parents took advantage of that. My father was an attorney with the Justice Department, so he wasn't involved in the arts directly, but he was the best father one could have and the best husband for my mother because he loved the arts as much as she did. And he didn't need to be dragged to all of the concerts and performances that she wanted them to subscribe to. And a typical birthday for any one of the four of us was to be taken out to the theater to see a musical theater production, Fiddler on the Roof, I remember.
Sure.
And others, and then be taken out to dinner. So we had a really tight, wonderful, warm family, and culture was really a big part of it.
You've mentioned to me that your father in particular also had a real commitment to service.
That's right. He actually was the longest serving attorney in the history of the U.S. Department of Justice. And his department was antitrust. So he was a legend. He was called the Bulldog because he never let go. If he saw price fixing or monopolies or any corporate behavior that was damaging to small business or the consumer, that was his charge to stop it. And if the administration at the time was not in favor of regulation, he would just shelve the case and bring it back when conditions were better. So we had this sense of social impact, a sense of responsibility, wanting to make a difference in the world.
So what a rich background you had as a child.
When people ask me who were my influences, it was my parents. My parents were the greatest influence.
And what were things like for you at school?
I was into the arts, not sports. Academically, I was adequate, but quite honestly, I was not a great student. I was not a real scholar. And it was hard for me because I was smart. And at the same time, I didn't love studying. So I would do the least amount of studying possible and play the piano and be in theater productions and do everything else. And that was where I really thrived.
Well, and thank goodness you followed your heart, followed your passions, because the world is better for it. But it's interesting that piano, not dance, was your primary focus initially.
That's right. I continued to study piano all the way through high school. I went to National Music Camp, Interlochen, and I was a piano major, so 13 years of piano training. But I knew that I was not going to be a pianist. This was kind of an interesting thing, that I loved music so much. And I loved it when I mastered a piece. But again, not being that scholarly type that could sit at the piano keyboard and concentrate for 2, 3, 4 hours. I couldn't do that. 1 hour was my max. I needed to move. But I couldn't let it go because I needed music in my life. And I didn't yet have dance.
Now, something else about your background that was somewhat unique was your exposure to different cultures, to different world views early on. Can you talk a little bit about that?
The public high school that I went to, Bethesda Chevy Chase, BCC High School, was in a neighborhood where many employees of the foreign embassies lived. And so their children went to that school. And I had friends from Brazil and Vietnam and many different countries. So I was exposed to this worldly environment. And it was something that just felt natural to me. One of the most important experiences that I had, my family hosted a boy from Sweden during my junior year of high school on the American Field Service AFS program. And having Roger in our family coming from northern Sweden, very, very bright and talented young man, that was very meaningful to have him as a brother. And that became a lifelong relationship.
And then you became an exchange student yourself.
Yes, I did. the summer after Roger left, I went to India as an AFS exchange student, and I lived with an Indian family, the Mehta family, for 3 months. And it was like a drop of water into the pond. I was so immersed. And one of their good friends were the Javeri sisters, the Manipuri dancers who toured the world. And this is where I was first exposed to dance on a professional level, was more in India than in America.
One of the things that I've heard you talk about is that in India, music and dance are not separate disciplines.
That's true. Every Indian dancer of any quality can sing or play the tabla. They have a command of rhythmic structure, which in Indian music is so complex, and it's so different from Western music. So every Indian dancer is also a musician. It just goes together.
And I know that exposure to Indian music and dance had a really profound impact on you. It sort of became woven into your DNA and is very much reflected in your current work. So, Roger from Sweden and your experience living in India with the Mehta family, clearly huge influences on you. And how did those two experiences impact your worldview?
Very much making me a citizen of the world and identifying with people from very different backgrounds. I mean, in 1968, when I went as an AFS student, a teenager, 16 years old, turning 17, when I arrived in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai, the airport was very basic. I remember a tin roof because it was pouring rain, it was monsoon season, and remember that atmosphere of humidity and the rain bouncing off this roof, and then getting in a car and going on a road. On either side, the road sloped down, and there were shacks and lean-tos where thousands of people were living, and I had never, ever seen poverty at that level before. So that was an exposure that stayed with me, of course.
That first awareness of one's privilege, so powerful. So you have this rich cultural background, a strong sense of social responsibility, multiple international exposures, most significantly your time living in India, where you both start to appreciate the advantages you've had and see that deep-rooted interplay of music and dance. All of this laying a strong foundation for what was to come. And by the way, you haven't even graduated from high school yet. So you come home from India, finish high school, and head off to college at the University of California at Irvine, which has a very robust fine arts program. But you didn't go there intending to pursue dance, right?
That's correct. I loved painting, sculpture, graphic design. And so I thought that was where I was going to go. But I was still playing the piano, so music was important. And dance was not even really something I was thinking about.
And you've shared with me the precise moment when you decided that you wanted to be a dancer. You were taking a sculpture class, the orientation was minimalism, you weren't really feeling it, and you look outside and have one of those gut level realizations that you need to make a change.
It was beautiful weather. September in Southern California, it was nirvana. And dancers were on the lawn, dancing, practicing, getting ready for auditions. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do that. I don't want to do this. So it seems so strange and so flippant for a young person to say no to something that they had loved and yes to something they don't even really know anything about, which is the profession of dance.
So you followed your intuition, and thankfully you were at the right place, a place where you could do that. And I know that there were a lot of really talented artists teaching at UC Irvine regularly, and also many who visited for a semester or some other period of time. And one of the people who came for a 1-week residency was the legendary dancer and choreographer Merce Cunningham. And that ended up being one of those fateful encounters that would change the trajectory of your life. Can you tell us about that?
Merce Cunningham comes and is there for a week. I'm taking his classes. I'm watching the performances. I'm literally transfixed by what I was seeing. And I really didn't think I was a very good dancer, but my musical background gave me a leg up because I could pick up movement very quickly and the musicality could carry me through. Also, the theatricality that's needed. So I didn't have the equipment in some ways, but I was really dedicated to making up for it. And that's when I learned what it means to really dedicate and work hard at something until you've mastered it or could get to the point where you were as good as you could be. And dance gave me that love of practice that I didn't have in anything else that I did.
And Merce took notice, right?
Merce offered me a scholarship. I was in Eugene Loring's dance performance of a piece called Folk Dances of a Mythical Country. I mean, what an incredible title that is. And I finished that performance, but I did not finish the term. I just packed my car and drove across country. And that was the beginning, 19 years old, the beginning of my dance career.
So you get to New York, where you're a scholarship student with the Cunningham Company, and you work as a dancer and choreographer in New York for about 5 years before founding the Battery Dance Company. You were in a company called the New York Dance Collective for 3 of those years, during which time you have the opportunity to work with the legendary dancer and choreographer Twyla Tharp. Were there particular experiences you had during that time that informed your vision for Battery Dance?
Having the exposure of working with a master like Twyla Tharp and Merce Cunningham in very, very different ways of working in very different vocabularies, I saw that they had such strong identities as artists and they were single-minded. I mean, the two of them never stopped working. To this day, Twyla, I don't know exactly how old she is, but she's either 80 or above. And Merce danced until he could hardly even walk, and he was on stage. So they were single-minded and driven. And while I had that passion for the artistry and the art, I also had a care and concern for finding a way in my life that I could be of service. It had to be both.
And of course, you've been of service, had a social impact in a multitude of ways. And one of those ways is by taking dance out of the theater and into public spaces, bringing dance to a broad swath of people. What sparked that idea?
So 2 events showed me what dance could be in the public space and the impact it could have when passersby were riveted by this art form that I loved and was passionate about. The first one was dancing with Twyla at Battery Park. She had a morning, noon, and night program. Morning was very early in the morning at Fort Tryon Park in Upper Manhattan. Noon was at Battery Park, and that was the part that I was dancing in. And then night was in City Hall with her 3 or 4 or 5 key dancers performing there. I loved that site-specific idea, in part because it was so interesting to take dance out of the concert stage and put it in the public space, but also because then it became accessible. So that was the first experience. The next one was, I think it was Mayor Lindsay at the time. I'm not really sure, but they closed down Avenue of the Americas, 6th Avenue, above 42nd Street. And if you've been in that area, you know that there are these huge corporate plazas. There are either big porches that are a couple steps up off the sidewalk in front of a tall tower building, or the McGraw-Hill Plaza, which was sunken down below. And in each one of these spaces, there were dance companies, modern dance companies. Jamie Cunningham, Viola Farber, I think Twyla might have been part of that. And hordes of people walking on 6th Avenue, experiencing dance on either side. It was just mesmerizing. And it stuck with me.
So eventually the New York Dance Collective comes to an end and people disperse.
People were going in different directions. 2 of the dancers joined the Paul Taylor Dance Company. 1 of the dancers joined Jean Erdman and her Theater of the Open Eye. And for me, I had had enough experience to realize I want to be my own boss. I want to have my own enterprise, whatever that would look like.
So this is now 1976, bicentennial year, so very celebratory time. And you and your then wife secure a loft space in Lower Manhattan, plant roots right in the middle of Wall Street of all places. And that is where the story of Battery Dance Company really begins. And what were some of your goals in those early days?
So on the one hand, I had the highest aspirations artistically. I cared about the quality of music. I always used live music in my first years of choreography. Nobody does that, but I needed the music, commissioned music. Well-known composers wrote scores for me, and that music and dance growing together was very important.
And two questions I know you grappled with were, who would the audience be and where would you perform? And one thing was clear, you did not want to only be performing in black box theaters.
Those 5 years before I founded Battery Dance, I had been in the black box theaters and I had been competing for attention with the other small dance companies. And I thought to myself, that's not my ultimate goal. First of all, ultimately, I want to tour internationally. I want to use my love of the world and bring my work as an artist to the world, not just these black box theaters where everybody is looking through a magnifying glass to see whether it's good, bad, or indifferent.
And of course, that early desire to tour internationally grew into something much bigger, as Battery Dance now performs across continents, leading workshops and showing up as a cultural ambassador in communities around the world. And we're going to dig into that global work, how it's evolved since those early days, and the impact it's had. But first, I want to spend a few minutes highlighting the work you've done and the impact Battery Dance has had closer to home, in its hometown, the city of New York. And right from the start, you and your dancers were performing all over Manhattan, but not inside theaters. Rather, you were out on the streets.
Part of that was being in an area of New York that had no theaters and no spaces dedicated to the arts. The only place for us to go, the natural place, was out onto the street, into the parks, plazas, and piers of Lower Manhattan. We did performances outdoors in Chase Plaza. That was one of our first locations. The South Street Seaport was a location. We were a roving dance company performing wherever we could, including in Battery Park in those early days.
And one of the places that you performed regularly was at the World Trade Center Plaza. And I've seen pictures of your dancers performing against the backdrop of those enormous, imposing towers. And it's just such an incredible juxtaposition. And Jonathan, you were kind enough to invite me to attend a panel discussion you participated in recently at the 9/11 Museum. And much of that discussion was about a performance you choreographed and that one of your dancers performed to live music on the cusp of the frozen zone just 2 weeks after the attacks on the World Trade Center. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that performance?
The attacks on the World Trade Center were blocks away from the loft where I lived with my then wife and 2 daughters, and which was shared with Battery Dance's studios and office. My daughters attended the neighborhood public elementary school in the shadow of the towers, so 9/11 shook us to the core. We struggled to figure out what our role might be as artists in that tragic moment and what we could do for our community and for ourselves and for healing. 2 weeks after the attacks, we decided to bring music and dance out onto the street at Franklin Station in the frozen zone. I called Tadej Brudnik, one of our dancers, and Shamir Chatterjee, a composer and tabla player with whom I had worked previously, and asked if they would be willing to perform in this way at this time in this space, and they both agreed. Shamir had composed a beautiful work called Jyotsna that I had choreographed into a solo for Tadej called Pavilion, an ethereal work that I thought could serve as a tribute to those lost in the attacks. Shamir, his wife Shangamitra, Yusuf Sharonik, and Eric Finney began to play, and people came out of their homes. They heard the music, the beautiful lilting melody, and the percussion against what had been the constant rumble of trucks and construction equipment. It was a remarkable confluence, a juxtaposition of beauty, tranquility, and poetry, against the grinding process of reclaiming that land and ultimately clearing it.
And for anyone who is in Manhattan at that very dark, very melancholy time, I'm sure you can imagine what the impact would have been. You're in your home or office, hear something in the background, maybe you're a little confused, and then you walk outside and there's this captivating dance performance going on, and you hear this. There's something so spiritual about that music. And again, that beautiful piece was composed by Shamir Chatterjee. And Jonathan, thank you for letting us play that little musical interlude for our listeners. And I should mention that after that panel discussion at the 9/11 Museum, one of Battery Dance's current dancers performed that same piece for us all these years later. And it was so moving and really, really special for those of us who were lucky enough to be there. So Jonathan, let's pivot a bit and talk about your current studio space in Tribeca. Can you describe that for us?
When we moved here in 1984, this was no man's land. It was a place in transition. Now it's a mecca for art because there are 80 art galleries that have moved in to our building and the immediate 4 blocks around us. But it was a space that needed something. It needed activation. So we found a floor of a very old building, a 170-year-old building with wooden floors and high ceilings and lots of light through skylights and windows and exposure on 3 sides. And this became our home in 1984, and we're here now.
And you're able to offer very affordable studio rehearsal space.
Yeah, that's right. In our 2 studios, we offer subsidized studio space to hundreds of dancers, ballet teachers, capoeira, you name it. All genres of dance are welcome here. Every possible form of dance has been done here. It's not an exclusive, expensive place. You have to walk up 97 steps to get to the 5th floor of this building, but it's a place that has its own identity and its own history, and people love it.
So not only are you making dance accessible by bringing it to people out on the streets, but you're also providing this subsidized rehearsal space for a very broad cross-section of the dance community. And the dancers in your company, they come from all over the world, right?
That's very true. New York, even though it's incredibly expensive and space to live is really hard to find, people still come here from all over the world. And we have dancers from every single continent and country. And that makes it very interesting for me because of my passion for world culture.
And Jonathan, I know that over time you moved away from dancing quite so much yourself because you were drawn to choreography. And of course, the cornerstone of what you do at Battery Dance is to create innovative, new, inspiring works of art. And you've shared with me that one of the things you love about being a choreographer is that you love shining light on your dancers, which is just such a lovely sentiment. Now, your dancers are also choreographers, and you and some of the organizations you partner with bring in choreographers from all over the world to work with your dancers at your studio in New York, some of whom perform at the renowned Battery Dance Festival. And I actually got to speak with one of those choreographers, and we'll play a few clips from that conversation shortly. But first, Jonathan, can you tell our listeners a little bit about the Battery Dance Festival, which has become a quintessential event in Lower Manhattan and represents sort of the evolution or culmination of all of the outdoor performing you've done over the years?
Our Battery Dance Festival is going into its 44th year. It's New York's longest running public dance festival. We are so lucky to have a partnership with Battery Park City Authority, which has brought us into Wagner Park and Rockefeller Park and supported the festival in a very, very robust way. So that is our gift to the community in Lower Manhattan and beyond every summer.
And what is it about the Battery Dance Festival that makes it so special and that attracts so many people, over 12,000 in person and over 35,000 virtual viewers year after year?
The Battery Dance Festival is, even for me after all these years, it remains a unique experience because we're all rushing around New York all the time, going to appointments. We're late, we're dashing into the subway. But here you are in a public park, and in the middle of this cityscape, beautiful dancers of all genres are performing against the sky, against the water, against this cityscape. And it's electrifying.
And I mentioned earlier that I recently had a conversation with one of the choreographers you worked with. His name is Rutkay Özpinar, a choreographer from the Netherlands. And you were able to bring Rutkay to New York to work with your dancers and then perform at the festival. And he and I talked about what a wonderful experience that was for him. So I want to play that clip. But first, Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit about Rutkay and how you were able to bring him to New York?
I was given the opportunity to look through a list of choreographers that were house choreographers at a theater called the Corso Theater in The Hague, Netherlands, because we were working with the Dutch consulate in New York that was preparing to celebrate the 400th anniversary of New Amsterdam. And Battery Dance was very fortunate to be part of that project. And I was looking down the list and I spotted a name that looked familiar, and it was Rutkay Özpinar. I had been following him on social media, and one of the things that was fascinating to me was he had decided at a certain point during COVID, when he was locked in, to dig into his Turkish background. He's a Dutch dancer, choreographer, teacher, but has a Turkish background. And he wanted to find out where he was from, dance-wise. So he studied Turkish folk dance and belly dance and sort of added that way of moving into his repertoire.
And here's a clip from my conversation with Rutkay. So first of all, Rutkay, thank you so much for sitting down to speak with me.
Thank you.
Why don't you start by telling us how you first connected with Jonathan and Battery Dance Company, and then perhaps you can describe what it was like collaborating with them in New York.
So Jonathan and I have been friends on Facebook for a few years. And in September of 2023, I was aspiring to get a project in New York and create a piece at a dance company. And I received a message from Jonathan telling me that he was interested in a collaboration.
And how did he become familiar with your work? On Facebook?
Yes, because I was sharing videos of my works, not only contemporary dance, but also belly dance. And something that Jonathan really loves are different cultures. And I do include my Turkish background into my work. And I think that moved him. And that's, I believe, one of the reasons he invited me to create a piece for Battery Dance Company. And the piece would premiere during Battery Dance Festival, which happened last August of 2024. And it was like a dream come true.
And why was it such a dream come true to work with Jonathan as opposed to any other choreographer?
Because he understood my vision and where I was coming from. He wasn't questioning my vision or my capability of doing something. He knew I could. And to feel that trust really changes the game a lot. And it is such a solid backbone for a choreographer, which gave me the freedom to work the way I wished I could. And I think that's very important in a collaboration. Also to break the walls of being super formal and reserved with each other, because we are artists. We work with our souls. We feel different every day. And to have this safe space where you can be who you are is something to cherish.
And what was it like working with the Battery Dance Company dancers?
It was amazing. The dancers worked so fast. They are so giving, so motivated. We were inspiring each other. And it was not about what they wanted or I wanted. It's about what we could make possible together. And that's how we brought the best of each other to life within the short amount of time that we had.
And can you describe what it was like both to perform at the Battery Dance Festival and to take it in as a spectator?
Battery Dance Festival is a magical experience. I mean, When I was performing there were so many people sitting in the park on grass. They were sitting on cloths and some had picnic baskets. And to see dance being performed on stage during sunset, seeing the Hudson Yards skyscrapers on the background and the slight breeze of the Hudson River is beautiful. And during sundown, you see the sky turn red and orange. It becomes a background for the stage. And it's an experience you won't get in the theater. It's amazing, really.
So clearly, working with the Battery Dance Company and performing at the festival was a wonderful experience for Rutkay. And as you can tell, he has this super positive energy, and I have no doubt that he infuses that wonderful spirit of his into his work.
What was so wonderful is that the Dutch consulate and the different funders of this project allowed us not only to have this fabulous choreographic residency with Rutkay, out of which this new piece, Frontiers, was built, that we perform now in many places around the world. But we could also showcase Rutkay's solo on stage and a performance of a trio that he had created earlier. And so it was this very complete introduction of his artistry on stage at the Battery Dance Festival.
And of course, the festival features artists and dance companies from all over the world who are, in many cases, premiering new works, as Rutkay did in 2024. Now, one more thing I want to mention about the work you do, you also help to bring dance into or support dance programs within the New York City public schools.
We bring a variety of different programs, elementary, middle school, high school level programs into the schools to supplement what the public school system can offer. Not every school is able to have a dance teacher. Many do, and then we can build on what is already there.
So Battery Dance Company has established a significant and enduring presence in New York, particularly in Lower Manhattan, where it has very deep roots and has helped to nurture a strong sense of community. Okay, so for our remaining time together, I want to focus on the international work you do, using dance not just as an art form, but also as a tool for building understanding and connection across the globe. And the primary way that you do that is through your signature program, Dancing to Connect. Jonathan, can you start by telling us in broad strokes what Dancing to Connect is all about?
Dancing to Connect is not about going into a dance conservatory and offering master classes. It's about working with young people, regardless of whether they have any prior dance experience, and helping them find the dancer within themselves. And through Dancing to Connect, we have been able to activate young people and teachers and give them the tools to express themselves through movement. And Dancing to Connect is the vehicle by which we have been going around the world doing programs with U.S. embassies and State Department as cultural ambassadors.
Can you walk us through how Dancing to Connect got started, share its origin story?
For years, I had been trying to build an international program, a touring schedule. But because of the expense and because if you haven't done it, nobody knows you, how do you get a foot in the door? Slowly but surely, we got opportunities to perform overseas. And in 2006, there was a very unique program called Dances for the Blue House, which came from an AFS relationship that I had as a teenager with a German girl who became a community activist in southwestern Germany. And she brought a community together to save what was the last emblem of Jewish life in a town that had had 300 years and more of Jews and Christians living together until Kristallnacht, the night in which the Nazis had this coordinated attack on Jewish businesses, Jewish homes, and synagogues across the country. The synagogue was destroyed. One house became the place of worship. It was the home of the cantor in the Jewish community. She found out that that building was going to be condemned, and she mobilized the town to save the building. They preserved the building and made it into a living memorial for the Jews of Breisach, Germany. So a colleague of mine Aviva Geismar and I, both of whom had our own dance companies, felt a connection and we were drawn to support this. So in 2006, we mobilized support from the American government, from German foundations, from businesses, from individuals, and we brought 2 dance companies over to Breisach. We thought that by bringing New York dance companies to Breisach, we would expand awareness of this grassroots effort to reclaim history.
And a perfect way for you to combine all those things you love: dance, world history and culture, and having a social impact. And not only did your dancers perform, but they also conducted workshops with students.
That's right. Aviva and her company and my company worked with school groups, high schools at different levels. And we worked with any and every high school student, whether or not they had any experience.
And as I understand it, the students actually choreographed their own dance pieces with the support of your dancer teachers, of course, but created by them. And these dance pieces became a way for the students to address their history, to grapple with the Holocaust through the language of movement, the language of dance. So, Jonathan, at a certain point, you decide to stop by one of the workshops to see how things are going. And what did you find?
I went in not knowing what I was going to see. I had the role of troubleshooting, talking to the press, handling absentees, just making sure everything was working, but I was not running a workshop. My dancers were doing that. Aviva's dancers were doing that. And I remember so vividly sitting in a large room in one of the schools, and I was watching what had been created just after 3 days of training. And I saw kids, first of all, these were not dancers. These were not people who had used the language of movement. And there was a depth, there was a profundity, there was an authenticity. And it took me by surprise, and I choked up and tears started, and I just had to leave the room because I was so overcome with emotion to see these high school students making themselves vulnerable, dealing with a theme that was very, very difficult historically, and how they were processing it through movement. It was so compelling.
So there was lots of press, lots of attention paid to what you were doing. But Jonathan, what was the impact on you, and how did that experience shape your perspective or your approach moving forward?
It changed my entire approach to dance and dance education, because what happened was that through this pedagogical approach that we were experimenting with, all of these dance pieces were created by the students that they then felt an ownership of. So when they went on stage after 20 hours of workshop time and they did a movement, it was their movement. It was coming from their body. And we also saw all of these elements of the evolution, the growth, the growing up of a young person, that transition point from youth to adulthood. We saw them realize that they could work as a team, even if before they walked into this workshop, they didn't know anything about the other people in the workshop. So all these lessons were being learned individually and collectively, and I was learning. There was a before and after for me. The before was, you can't have people choreographing if they don't have a movement language that's already vocabulary evolved through study.
Right. You were skeptical initially.
I was very skeptical. I just didn't know. It was taking a risk. It was jumping off a cliff and not knowing where the landing would be.
Well, you clearly landed somewhere meaningful. And it's almost hard to imagine that you have since done programs in over 70 countries over a 20-year period. Programs designed to integrate newly arrived refugees and unaccompanied minors with their counterparts in their new communities. Programs designed to end bullying and combat xenophobia. Programs to empower the less advantaged through workshops focused on providing hope, increasing confidence, and building leadership and life skills. And we're going to do a deep dive into what these workshops look like and the impact they have on both participants and the teaching artists who run them. But we're going to pause there for now. We actually decided to share this episode on YouTube in 2 parts. So that's it for part 1. And I hope you'll join us for the second half of my conversation with Jonathan Hollander on the evolution and extraordinary global impact of battery dance.